My granddaughter called me at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I knew before I even answered that something was wrong. She never called that early. She was 16 years old and barely functional before 10 a.m. on a school day. I'd been up since 5:30 the way I always am now. Old habit from 40 years of getting to the lumberyard before the trucks came in. And I was standing at the kitchen counter with my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed against the tile. The name on the screen said Lily Grace. I picked up on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She didn't say Grandpa. What she said was, in a voice so small I almost didn't recognize it. "Pop, I'm at Riverside General. Mom brought me in last night, but she told me not to call you." I waited until she went to get coffee. I set my cup down. "I'm coming," I said. "Which floor?" "Third. Pediatric wing." "But Pop, when you get here," she stopped. I could hear her breathing in that careful, deliberate way kids breathe when they're trying not to cry. "He's going to tell you I fell down the stairs." I was already moving toward my keys. Riverside General is 22 minutes from my house in normal traffic. I made it in 14. I'm 64 years old and I've slowed down in most things, but I pressed that truck through every yellow light on Route 9 and I don't apologize for it. The third floor smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. A nurse at the station directed me down the hall without me having to say much. I must have had a look on my face that communicated urgency, because she just pointed and said, "Room 318. Lily Grace was in the bed closest to the window. She was wearing one of those thin hospital gowns, and her left arm was in a soft splint from the wrist to just below the elbow. She had shadows under her eyes the color of old bruises, and when she saw me walk through the door, her face crumpled for just a second before she pulled it back together. That's what got me, the way she pulled it together. At 16, she already knew how to hold herself still when she wanted to fall apart. I thought about when she was 4 years old, sitting on my porch eating a popsicle, and something cold moved through my chest. My daughter was sitting in the chair beside the bed. She looked up when I came in, and there was something on her face, not relief, not welcome, something more like bracing, like she was tightening down for impact. "Dad," she said, "I was going to call you this morning." "It's morning," I said. She had an accident. I didn't look at her when she said that. I looked at Lily Grace. "You want to tell me what happened, sweetheart?" My granddaughter glanced at her mother. Then she looked back at me, and I saw her make a decision. "I didn't fall down the stairs," she said. The room got very quiet. My daughter stood up. "Lily Grace, we talked about this." "Mom." My granddaughter's voice didn't waver. "He asked me." I pulled the other chair up next to the bed and sat down close to her. I kept my voice steady and low. "Tell me," she told me. It took a while, and she stopped a few times, and I didn't rush her once. What she described was this. The night before, she had come home from her friend Tanya's house around 7:30. Her mother's boyfriend, a man named Roger, had been drinking. He'd been doing that more often lately. Lily Grace said it had been happening for about 4 months, since around Christmas. He'd been in the kitchen when she came in, and she'd said something. She wasn't even sure what. Just something ordinary, a normal teenager thing, and he'd reached out and grabbed her wrist and twisted it the way you'd wring out a washcloth, and then shoved her sideways into the doorframe. She heard the crack before she felt the pain. Her mother had been upstairs. By the time she came down, Roger was already giving his version of events. Lily Grace had slipped on the kitchen tile, lost her footing, grabbed the counter on the way down. It was an accident. He was so sorry. He'd already gotten her an ice pack. Lily Grace had stood there with her arm bent wrong, and her mother had looked at her, then at Roger, and then said, "We need to get you to urgent care, baby." Not, "Did he hurt you?" Not, "What happened?" Just, "We need to get you to urgent care." I sat with that for a moment after she finished. I looked at her arm in that splint. I looked at her face, at the careful way she was watching me to see what I would do. "You did right calling me," I said. A doctor came in about 10 minutes later. Young woman, maybe early 30s, with short hair and the kind of measured calm that tells you someone has delivered hard news before. She introduced herself as Dr. Kamara. She had Lily Grace's chart in her hand, and she asked my daughter and me if she could speak with us in the hall. My daughter didn't want to leave the room. I told her we should hear what the doctor had to say. In the hallway, Dr. Kamara spoke carefully, the way people do when they're choosing each word on purpose. She said the fracture pattern in Lily Grace's arm was a spiral fracture of the radius. She paused to make sure we were following. A spiral fracture, she explained, occurs when bone is subjected to a twisting force. It doesn't happen in falls. It doesn't happen when you slip on tile and catch yourself on a countertop. The injury is consistent with the arm being grabbed and rotated forcefully, she said. It is not consistent with an accidental fall. She looked at my daughter when she said it. My daughter looked at the floor. Then Dr. Kamara said something else. She said that as a physician, she was required by law to report any injury to a minor that presented as non-accidental to Child Protective Services and local law enforcement. She had already made those calls that morning. She said this not apologetically, but clearly, like it was simply what was true. An officer will be here within the hour, she said. I wanted you to know before they arrived. My daughter made a sound I hadn't heard from her since she was a girl, something between a gasp and a moan. She put her hand over her mouth. I thanked Dr. Kamara. She nodded and walked back toward the nurse's station. I stood in that hallway for a moment. Through the window in room 318, I could see Lily Grace watching us from the bed. She had her good hand pressed flat against the mattress. Waiting, I went back in. My daughter followed me. Roger was there. He'd come in while we were in the hall. He was sitting in the chair I'd been using, and he looked up when I walked in with the expression of a man who has already decided how the next 10 minutes are going to go. He was 51, heavyset, with the kind of face that looks friendly at first glance and less friendly the longer you look at it. He'd been with my daughter for going on 2 years. I had met him 6 times, maybe 7. He'd always been perfectly pleasant to me. Mr. Sutherland, he said. That was my name, Franklin Sutherland. He stood up partway, offered his hand. I didn't take it. You should leave, I said. He blinked, looked at my daughter. Gwen, the police are coming, I said. That's not a threat, that's a fact. Dr. Kamara reported the injury this morning. You should not be in this room when they get here. Something moved behind his eyes. It wasn't guilt, it was calculation. This is a misunderstanding, he said. She slipped. I was right there, I tried to. Roger, I kept my voice even. The doctor already explained what kind of fracture she has and how that kind of fracture happens. You're not in a position where your version of events is useful to you anymore. He looked at my daughter again. Gwen was standing by the window with her arms crossed tight over herself, looking at the floor, looking at the wall, looking everywhere except at her daughter in the bed. Gwen, he said, softer. Honey, you know what happened. The room was very quiet. Lily Grace was the one who spoke, she said, quietly and without any particular drama, just as a statement of fact. He's done it before. I looked at her. Not like this, she said. He never broke anything before. But he's grabbed me before, shoved me. Once he threw a book at me and said he was throwing it at the wall. She paused. It hit me in the shoulder. My daughter made that sound again. Roger started to say something. I took one step toward him and he stopped. Get out of this room, I said. Right now. He got out. I don't know exactly what happened in the hall. I heard his voice and then I didn't. I stayed with Lily Grace and let Gwen follow him out. I sat on the edge of my granddaughter's bed and I held her good hand, and I didn't say anything wise or reassuring because I wasn't feeling wise or reassuring. I was feeling something I hadn't felt since I was maybe 25, the kind of cold anger that used to get me into trouble before I learned to carry it differently. But I was 64 now, and I had learned some things, and one of them was that the most important thing in this moment was the girl in front of me. So I sat there, and after a while she leaned her head against my shoulder. An officer arrived about 45 minutes later. A young man named Corporal Avery, probably not much older than 30, who was very professional and very thorough. He spoke with Lily Grace first, privately, with a victim advocate from the hospital present. Then he spoke with me briefly in the hall. Then he went looking for Gwen, who had come back into the room somewhere in the middle of all of this, who had sat in the corner chair, looking like someone had removed all her bones. I don't know exactly what Gwen told the officer. I know that when he came back, he told me a report had been filed, and that it would be forwarded to the county DA's office, given the nature of the injury and the minor's age. Roger, he said, was no longer on hospital property. He'd be asked to come in for a formal interview. What happens after that? I asked. That depends on a few things, Corporal Avery said. He was honest about it. But the medical documentation is significant. After he left, I found Gwen in the family waiting room at the end of the hall. She was in a chair with her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands. I sat down across from her. We didn't talk for a while. She'd been a good mother once. That sounds like something you'd say about someone who was dead, and she wasn't dead. But I was grieving something sitting there in that waiting room. Grieving the version of my daughter who had once, 12 years ago, picked up her 6-year-old girl and carried her to my truck at midnight during a thunderstorm, because the kid was scared, who'd driven all the way to my house just so Lily Grace could sleep in her old room with the nightlight. She told me things, Gwen said, finally. Her voice was muffled behind her hands. Over the past few months, little things. And I thought... She stopped, shook her head. You thought she was being dramatic, I said. You thought they didn't get along and you thought she was exaggerating. Gwen looked up. Her eyes were swollen. I didn't want to see it. I looked at her for a long moment. Gwen, she has a spiral fracture. Do you know what that means? The doctor told me. It means someone twisted her arm hard enough to snap the bone. That's what he did to your daughter while you were upstairs. She put her face back in her hands. I'm not a man who cries easily. I've been through enough. Lost my wife 11 years ago. Lost my brother the year after that. Worked through all of it the way men of my generation were taught to work through things, which is mostly by not sitting still. But sitting in that waiting room, I felt something pressing behind my eyes, and I had to look at the ceiling for a moment and wait for it to pass. She called me, I said. She waited until you went to get coffee, and she called me because she needed someone to believe her. She's 16 years old. You're her mother. Gwen didn't say anything. You have to make a choice now, I said. Not about Roger. That's already done. That's not a choice you get to make anymore. The choice I'm talking about is about your daughter, whether she gets a mother who stands beside her through what comes next, or whether she spends the rest of her life knowing that when it mattered, you picked him. I heard Gwen exhale, long and slow. I didn't know it was that bad, she said. You didn't let yourself know, I said. There's a difference, and she knows the difference too. She was quiet for a very long time after that. I sat with her. I'm good at sitting with hard things. That's one advantage of being old. You've been through enough silence to know it won't kill you. Finally, she looked up at me. Her face was wrecked, but there was something resolving behind her eyes. I need to go talk to her, she said. Yes, I said. You do. I stayed in the waiting room while Gwen went back down the hall. I sat there with the hum of the ventilation system and the occasional squeak of shoes on linoleum and the distant beeping that hospitals always have. And I thought about the last 4 months. About Lily Grace coming to dinner at my house on Sunday evenings. How she'd gotten quieter since Christmas. I'd thought it was just the teenage thing. The closing off that happens right around 16, the way they turn inward for a while. I'd thought it was normal. I hadn't asked. I'd noticed, and I hadn't asked. I put that thought somewhere I could carry it. After about 20 minutes, I walked back to room 318. Gwen was sitting on the edge of the bed with her arm around Lily Grace, and my granddaughter was crying the way she hadn't let herself cry in front of me, fully, with her whole body. Gwen had her chin resting on top of Lily Grace's head, and she was crying too. Neither of them said anything when I came in. I just pulled the chair up and sat down, and we stayed that way for a while, the three of us. It's strange what can hold a family together and what can crack it. I've thought about that a lot in the months since. You'd think a moment like that would be the end of something. And it was. It was the end of Roger, who moved out of my daughter's house the following week, who surrendered to police for a formal interview the week after that, and who, 4 months later, entered a guilty plea on one count of felony child abuse and was sentenced to 18 months, with 3 years of probation to follow. I was in the courtroom when he was sentenced. So was Gwen. So was Lily Grace, who had written a victim impact statement that she read aloud in a voice that only shook once, right at the beginning, and then steadied. She stood there in that courtroom in her good blazer and read what he had done to her, and what it had cost her, and what she intended to do with the rest of her life anyway. I'm not ashamed to tell you that the old man in the second row had to look at the ceiling again. But here's the thing that stays with me most. Not the courtroom, not the guilty plea. What stays with me is a conversation I had with Lily Grace about 2 weeks after she came home from the hospital. She was at my house for Sunday dinner, the way she usually was, and after we ate, she helped me dry the dishes the way she'd done, since she was small enough that I had to hand things down to her. She said out of nowhere while she was drying a glass, "I almost didn't call you." I waited. I thought. She turned the glass in her hands. "I thought maybe you'd think I was being dramatic. Or you'd ask Mum first. Or you'd believe him because adults always believe adults." I thought about that for a moment. "What made you call?" She set the glass down carefully in the cabinet. "I knew you'd come," she said. "Even if you weren't sure. I knew you'd get in the truck and come and then figure out what to believe when you got there." I didn't have an answer for that. I just nodded. "That's all I needed," she said. "Just someone who would come. She's doing well now. Seeing a counselor, which was Gwen's idea, and she goes willingly, which tells you something. Her wrist healed clean. The orthopedist said she'd have full range of motion, no lasting damage, which is the best news you can get from a conversation like that. She made the honor roll her junior year. She wants to study nursing, which I did not see coming, but which, thinking about Dr. Kamara standing in that hallway, choosing each word with care, makes a certain kind of sense. Gwen and I have had some hard conversations this year. Some things I said to her in that waiting room she needed to hear, and some of them she's still working through. We're not back to where we were. I'm not sure we'll ever be exactly back, but we're getting somewhere. She calls me on Sundays now, before dinner. That's new. That's something. I said at the beginning that I've been thinking about what it means to show up. What it actually means. Not the feeling of caring about someone, not the intention, but the act. Getting in the truck, going to the floor they tell you to go to, sitting in the chair, staying. I'm 64 years old, and I've been a father and a husband, and I've buried people I loved, and I've made my share of mistakes, and here is what I know. Children remember who came when they called. They remember who got in the truck without asking every question first. They carry that with them, the knowledge that there is one person who will simply show up. Be that person. Because the worst emergencies are often the quiet ones. The ones that have been going on for 4 months without a sound, behind closed doors, in houses where everything looks fine from the outside. They don't announce themselves. They don't scream for attention. They arrive as a phone call at 6:47 in the morning from a number that's in your contacts under a name you love, and they give you one small window of time to be the person that child needs you to be. I'm glad I answered. I'm glad I didn't ask questions first. I'm glad I just said I'm coming and went.